One of the most common mistakes people make when they start caring deeply about someone is slowly letting go of who they are, piece by piece, without even realizing it. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts small. You adjust your opinions to avoid conflict. You hold back your thoughts to keep things smooth. You change your habits, your preferences, even parts of your personality, just to make the connection work. And at first, it feels like compromise. It feels like effort. But over time, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes losing yourself, because when you start shaping your identity around someone else's approval, you're no longer showing up as who you truly are. You're showing up as who you think you need to be accepted. And that creates a dangerous dynamic, because now the connection is no longer built on truth. It's built on adaptation. You might tell yourself, this is just how relationships work, or I'm doing this because I care. But there's a difference between healthy compromise and self-erasure. Compromise is mutual. It respects both people. But losing your identity is one-sided. It's you bending, adjusting, and shrinking, hoping it will be enough to keep someone who hasn't fully chosen you as you are. And the problem with that approach is simple. If someone only stays because you changed yourself, they're not staying for the real you. They're staying for the version you created to fit their expectations. And that version is exhausting to maintain because it's not natural. It requires constant effort, constant awareness, constant adjustment. You're always thinking about what to say, how to act, what to avoid, because you're trying to protect something that isn't even built on authenticity. Over time, you start to feel it, the disconnect, the quiet frustration, the sense that something is off, even if everything looks okay on the surface. That feeling comes from the gap between who you are and who you're trying to be. And here's the truth. Someone who truly values you doesn't need you to become someone else to keep them. They don't require you to silence your voice, hide your personality, or sacrifice your identity just to maintain their interest. Real connection doesn't ask you to disappear. It allows you to exist fully, because the right person doesn't choose you for how well you can adjust. They choose you for who you already are. So when you find yourself changing too much, questioning your natural reactions, or holding back parts of yourself just to keep someone around, pause. Ask yourself what you're actually preserving. Because keeping someone at the cost of losing yourself is not a win. It's a slow loss. And the moment you stop trying to become what someone else wants is the moment you start standing in who you truly are. Another mistake that quietly drains your energy is chasing consistency from someone who has never shown it. At the beginning, it might not look like chasing. It feels like effort. You're reaching out, checking in, trying to keep the connection alive. You tell yourself you're just being attentive, just showing interest. But over time, you start to notice something. Your effort is constant, but theirs is unpredictable. You're the one initiating conversations. You're the one making plans. You're the one trying to fix things when the energy drops. And every time they pull back, you lean in a little more, thinking maybe this time it will balance out. Maybe this time they'll meet you halfway. But instead of balance, what forms is a pattern? One where you carry the weight of the connection while they participate only when it's convenient. And the longer you stay in that pattern, the more it starts to feel normal. You begin to justify it. You tell yourself they're just busy. They're not good at expressing themselves. They'll come around eventually. But consistency is not about personality, it's about priority. When someone truly values a connection, it shows in how they show up repeatedly, not occasionally. It doesn't require you to remind them, chase them, or hold everything together on your own, because chasing creates an illusion. It makes it seem like the relationship is still alive, still moving, still progressing. But in reality, it's being sustained by one person's effort. And that's not connection, that's maintenance. What makes it even more difficult is that inconsistency often comes with moments of intensity. They might give you attention suddenly, show up strongly for a short period, say the right things at the right time. And those moments keep you hooked. They make you believe there's potential, that something real is there if you just hold on a little longer. But those moments are temporary. They don't represent the whole picture. They interrupt it. Because consistency isn't about how someone shows up once in a while. It's about how they show up over time. And when you're chasing someone who isn't consistent, you slowly start losing your own balance. Your mood begins to depend on their responses. Your energy shifts based on their presence or absence. You find yourself waiting, checking, hoping, and without realizing it, you've given control of your emotional state to someone who hasn't even shown stable interest. That's where the shift has to happen, because the moment you stop chasing is the moment you start observing. You start seeing things as they are, not as you hope them to be. You recognize that effort should not feel one-sided, that connection should not feel forced, and that consistency should not feel like something you have to earn. Real effort meets you. It doesn't make you run after it. And the moment you stop chasing inconsistency is the moment you start choosing stability. One of the most dangerous things you can do is start accepting disrespect just because it comes with an apology. At first, it doesn't look like a pattern. It looks like a mistake, a bad moment, a wrong decision, something they didn't mean. And when they come back and say sorry, when they explain, when they show regret, it softens the impact. It makes you believe that what happened was temporary, not a reflection of who they are. But the real issue isn't the apology. It's what happens after it. Because anyone can say sorry. Anyone can recognize they crossed a line once it's already been crossed. But respect is not proven in the apology. It's proven in the change. It's proven in whether that same behavior shows up again or whether it actually stops. What often happens is that people confuse remorse with growth. They hear the right words, see the right emotions, and assume that means something has shifted. But if the same actions repeat, then nothing has truly changed. The apology becomes part of the cycle, not the solution to it. And over time, that cycle becomes normalized. You start lowering your expectations without realizing it. What once felt unacceptable slowly becomes something you tolerate. You tell yourself, at least he apologized, or he didn't mean it that way, or nobody's perfect. And while it's true that no one is perfect, consistent disrespect is not imperfection. It's a pattern. And patterns don't correct themselves unless they're confronted with real consequences. Because if someone can disrespect you, apologize, and still keep your access, your attention, and your presence exactly the same, then there's no real reason for them to change. The behavior continues because it's being allowed, even if it's not being approved. That's why it's important to separate words from actions. An apology without change is just repetition in a softer tone. It sounds better, it feels better in the moment, but it leads you back to the same place. And each time you accept it without requiring something different, you send a message not just to them, but to yourself, that this level of treatment is something you can live with. But deep down, you know it's not. Because real respect doesn't need constant repair. It doesn't put you in situations where you have to keep forgiving the same thing. It doesn't rely on apologies to maintain the connection. It shows up in how someone treats you consistently, especially when it's inconvenient for them. So when you find yourself hearing, sorry, more than you see real change, that's not growth. It's a warning. And the longer you ignore that warning, the more it becomes your reality. Because respect is not something you negotiate after it's broken. It's something that should be maintained from the start. And the moment you stop accepting repeated apologies without change is the moment you start protecting your own value. Another place people quietly lose themselves is in the habit of overgiving, believing that if they just do more, love will become stronger, clearer, and more secure. It starts from a genuine place. You care, so you give. You want the connection to grow, so you invest your time, your energy, your attention. But somewhere along the way, it shifts from mutual effort into one-sided proving. You're no longer giving because it feels natural. You're giving because you hope it will make you more valuable in their eyes. And that's where the imbalance begins. Because when you start overgiving, you stop paying attention to what's coming back. You focus so much on what you can do, what you can offer, what you can fix, that you lose sight of whether the other person is meeting you with the same level of effort. And instead of noticing the gap, you try to fill it yourself. You do more. You show up more. You give more chances, more understanding, more patience. But love doesn't grow through imbalance. It grows through reciprocity. When one person is constantly pouring in and the other is simply receiving, the dynamic changes. What you give starts to feel expected instead of appreciated. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because anything that's given without limits eventually becomes normal. And once it becomes normal, it loses its value in the eyes of the person receiving it. That's the part most people don't realize. Overgiving doesn't make you more valued. It often makes your effort less visible. Because if someone never has to work to meet your energy, they never fully understand its worth. They don't experience the absence of it, so they don't recognize the presence of it either. And slowly you start to feel it. The lack of appreciation, the lack of balance, the sense that you're doing so much but receiving so little in return. And instead of stepping back, you often lean in even more, thinking maybe if you just try a little harder, things will change. But effort cannot replace mutual interest. You can't give your way into being valued. You can't prove your way into being chosen. Because real connection doesn't require you to constantly demonstrate your worth. It recognizes it without you having to exhaust yourself. Overgiving also comes with a hidden cost. It drains you, emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physically. You start to feel tired, unappreciated, and eventually resentful. Not because you gave, but because you gave without receiving the same energy back. And that's not love, that's imbalance. So, the shift is not about stopping your ability to give, it's about giving with awareness. It's about making sure your effort is met, your presence is valued, and your energy is reciprocated. Because when giving is mutual, it strengthens the connection. But when another mistake that keeps people stuck longer than they should be is ignoring what's right in front of them, hoping it will somehow change over time. It's not that the signs aren't there, it's that they're uncomfortable to accept. So instead of facing them, you soften them. You explain them away. You tell yourself it's just a phase, that things will get better once certain circumstances change, once more time passes, once the connection grows stronger. But the truth is, what you see early on is rarely random. It's a preview. People show you who they are in the way they communicate, in how they handle conflict, in how consistent they are, in how they treat your time and your presence. And while no one is perfect, there's a difference between small imperfections and clear patterns. Red flags are not about expecting perfection. They're about recognizing behaviors that signal deeper issues. What makes red flags so easy to ignore is the presence of potential. You don't focus on what is, you focus on what it could become. You see the good moments, the chemistry, the connection, and you build a future around those highlights. And because that vision feels so real, so possible, you start minimizing the warning signs that don't fit into it. You tell yourself they didn't mean it, or they'll grow out of it, or I just need to be patient. And patience in the right situation is a strength. But in the wrong situation, it becomes a way of delaying the truth, because time doesn't change patterns. Awareness does. If someone is inconsistent in the beginning, that inconsistency doesn't disappear on its own. If someone struggles with honesty, respect, or effort early on, those challenges don't magically correct themselves just because you stay longer. In fact, staying often reinforces the behavior because it shows that those patterns are being accepted. And the longer you ignore red flags, the more emotionally invested you become. You build memories, routines, attachments. And that makes it harder to step away later, even when the signs become impossible to ignore. What could have been a clear decision early on turns into a complicated situation over time. That's why awareness at the beginning matters so much. It's not about being overly critical or looking for flaws. It's about paying attention. It's about noticing when something feels off and taking it seriously instead of dismissing it. Because that initial feeling is often your first indication that something doesn't align with what you truly need. Ignoring red flags doesn't protect the connection. It weakens your position in it. Because when you overlook what matters to you, you slowly move further away from your own standards. And once those standards are lowered, it becomes easier to accept things you never would have accepted before. But clarity changes everything. When you choose to see things as they are, not as you hope they'll become, you make decisions from a place of strength, not attachment. You stop waiting for change and start recognizing reality. And the moment you stop ignoring red flags is the moment you stop delaying the truth. And this is where everything comes together. Because after all the effort, all the patience, all the understanding, there comes a point where you have to ask yourself a simple but powerful question. Am I fully chosen here, or am I just being kept around? Because there's a difference, and it's not a small one. Being chosen means clarity. It means you don't have to question where you stand. It means the effort is consistent, the communication is direct, and the intention is clear. You don't feel like you're competing for attention, waiting for reassurance, or trying to secure a place in someone's life. It's already there without confusion. But being kept around feels different. It feels uncertain. It feels like you're always in between, sometimes close, sometimes distant, sometimes valued, sometimes overlooked. You get just enough attention to stay, but never enough to feel secure. And that space, that in-between, is where many people lose the most time, because it creates hope without stability. You might tell yourself, things are getting better, or he just needs more time, or I don't want to give up too soon. And those thoughts come from a place of wanting something real. But the reality is, when someone truly sees your value, they don't leave you in a position where you have to constantly prove it or wait for it to be recognized. Because real connection doesn't operate in uncertainty. It doesn't make you question your importance or feel like you're an option among many. It doesn't give you pieces of attention and call it effort. It doesn't require you to hold on to moments while ignoring the overall pattern. And the hardest part is that staying in that space often feels easier than walking away from it. Because walking away means letting go of what you hoped it would become. It means facing the reality that what you wanted may not exist in this situation. And that's not easy. But staying comes with a cost. It costs your time, your energy, your emotional stability. It keeps you invested in something that isn't fully investing in you. And over time, that imbalance starts to affect how you see yourself. You begin to accept less, expect less, and convince yourself that partial attention is enough. But it's not. You're not meant to be someone's maybe. You're not meant to exist in a space where your presence is optional. You're meant to be chosen, clearly, consistently, and without hesitation. And once you understand that, your decisions start to change. You stop holding on to situations that don't meet that standard. You stop trying to turn uncertainty into stability. You stop settling for being kept around when you know you deserve to be fully chosen. Because being chosen is not something you negotiate. It's something you recognize. And the moment you refuse to stay where you're not fully chosen is the moment you start choosing yourself.